we are in the middle of the discussion of the difference between the sets of fasts. There are three sets of communal fasts for rain. There's a fast that consists of 3 fast days. That's the first 3. Then comes another group of 3. That's the second 3 or the middle 3. And then you have the final fast, which are 7 fasts in the end. And that's the final 7. That's the third group of fasts. And there were differences between these fast days, different levels of stringency. And one of the question that our Gemara is dealing with, really, what its main interest is to find out if we recite the extra 6 brachos on only the last one, on the middle and the last, on all 3. We're trying to figure out when were all those blessings, extra blessings recited. There were additional brachas that were added to the Shemona Esrei on fast days, and we're trying to figure out which fast days did these extra brachas apply to. We definitely know that they applied to the last 7 days, the last 7 fasts. The question was, did they apply to the middle? And if they applied to the middle, maybe they applied to the first fast as well. And this will help us. Why do we want to know this? Because it'll help us come to the real question that we are dealing with. And the real question we're dealing with was, when does a individual include the Anenu prayer in his Shemona Esrei? And we had a brisa that was vague, and we wanted to translate it in a way that it would have that it could be translated, but we had an issue because of the fact that the fast days seemingly have 24 brachas, and then it wouldn't fit. Our translation of the brisa wouldn't fit if the early fast days have 24 brachas. Then we're going to have to translate this differently, and it'll come out to a different conclusion. So again, the main question that we're in the middle, the question that we're in the middle of discussing is, when did they add the Anenu? When did they add the extra 6 brachas? And the original question, which we still haven't come to a full-fledged conclusion, was when does an individual add? When does an individual add?
Thank you.
The Anenu prayer in his Shemona Esrei. So those are the 2 questions: the extra 6 brachas in the communal fasts, and the other question of when the individual adds the Anenu prayer. Okay, so we're on the top of the page, and we just said that the difference between the final 7 and the middle 3 fasts does not mention those differences. It doesn't mention the difference of teva. And teva meant that they would bring the ark into the thoroughfare, into the community square, I should say, into the community area, the community square, the public square, and they would make prayers over there. They would bring the ark there, and it was a ceremony that was done in order to, of course, pray to Hashem in a more very public way. Now, it mentions some differences between the middle 3 fasts and the final 7, but it doesn't mention the fact that they would bring the ark out into the public square. So the Gemara says, since it skipped out the teva difference, it also was skipping out other differences. And another difference might be the 6 brachas, that in the final 7 fasts, we add extra 6 blessings to the Chazan's Shemona Esrei, to his Amidah. And in the middle 3 fast days, we do not, even the Chazan does not add those extra 6 brachas. What do you mean? Why didn't it say it when it talks about the differences? It says these are the differences between the middle 3 and the final 7 fasts, and it doesn't mention the difference of the extra brachas. The Gemara says, you know why? Because it also skips out other things. It skips out the teva difference, that in the final 7, they would bring the ark out, and it doesn't, and they would not do that in the middle three. So it's not being so exact and precise. It's mentioning a few differences, but it's not telling you these are the only differences. It's not emphasizing that. It's saying these are the differences, but it's skipping out a few. It's leaving out some, and it's not just leaving out one, which would be a big question. If it's leaving out few, then we understand it wasn't exactly so precise. So the Gemara says, and we're on the top of the page, 14a, and if you're in the art scroll, it has to be 14a1. Top of the page, mishum teva lav shiuro. If it's, you're going to say that it left out teva, it left out the ark being brought to the public square, that is not called leaving out a difference. That's not a considered an omission. Why? Because mili ditsina katani, matters that are done in private, it mentioned, mili de pafarhesia like katani, matters that are done in public, like bringing the ark out into the public square, that was not done. That would not be mentioned there. Only matters that are done in private. When it says matters that are done in private, would mean like in a more humble setting, like inside a shul. They would mention the brachas, maybe, so that would be the differences. If it should say a difference of brachas, because if they added brachas only in the last seven and not in the middle three, it should mention brachas, the difference of brachas, because that's something done, the tzina, that's done in a more a setting that's more secluded, and matters that are done in public, like the public square, that it doesn't have to mention. I explained my own thought that the reason why what the Gemara means, I think this is the meaning of it, is that the things that are so obvious, it doesn't have to say. It's something that's done in such public with fanfare, and whistles and all the whistles and bells and whistles. It's not, there's no need for the Mishnah to tell you that difference. The Mishnah is telling you differences that some people might not know, but this is something that's so obvious and so public that it's everyone knows about it. That's my understanding, unless someone else has a better understanding. But so that's what the Gemara says, and therefore the Gemara wants to conclude with this, that the Mishnah did not say a difference between the middle set of fasts and the final 7 fasts, that there's a difference of brachas, the amount of blessings that the Chazan adds in the Shmoneh Esrei. It must be that the extra 6 brachas are added both in the final 7 and also in the middle 3 fasts they're also added these extra 6 brachas. And that's what the Gemara wants to say. But the Gemara says, and the Gemara says, Amar Rav Ashi masnisin nami deka. Rav Ashi says that the Mishnah also implies that all the 24 brachas are added in the middle fasts as well. Why? How does it hinted to in the Mishnah? Because the Mishnah says, Ma elu yeserais al harishonais. In what way are these more than the first, than the not first, but it means the earlier fasts, I mean the middle fasts? In what way are the final 7 more than the middle fasts, more stringent? Like these 7 fasts, they would do something extra. They would be masriyan, which we'll soon see if it means blowing the shofar, or it means they would recite an extra prayer, they would cry out. But in these 7 fasts, they would do this masriyan, whatever it's going to mean, we'll soon see. They would also close the shops. And but in all other matters, they are equal. So what does that imply? That the only difference between that our Mishnah, not only is it a brisa that says ein bein, that the difference between these two, the brisa said, what was the term in the brisa? Ein bein gimel shniyos l'sheva achreinis. Said there's no difference between the middle 3 and the final 7. The Mishnah also said, the Mishnah of course is more precise in its wording. The Mishnah said that the difference between the middle three and the final seven, or the extra stringencies of the final seven, it doesn't mention the brachas. It only mentions the differences of the masriyan and the closing of the stores on those final seven fast days. So, so the Gemara says v'chi tema, and basically everything else, obviously they're equal. V'chi tema hachan. Maybe you're going to say here also Tana Bashir, the author of the Mishnah, taught, and he left out some. V'hama elu katani. It says in what way are these different and more strict? It doesn't. It implies it's precise. It's being precise. So the Gemara says, "V'tizbra, do you think it's being so precise? Ma elu davkahu, you think it's being so precise, and it's saying in what way are these different? Meaning it's telling us every single way. V'hashir lateva, it skipped out in the Mishnah. It also skipped out a big difference, the teva difference. What's the difference of teva? The ark, that only in the final seven would they bring out the ark into the public square, and they wouldn't bring it out the middle three fasts. So that would seemingly be a proof that it's not so precise. So there might be other differences as well. Now, we have an answer to that question from the previous Gemara. The Gemara just said the difference that it doesn't mention things that are done bifar hesya, things that are done in public, right? But the Gemara gives a different answer. Taisus is bothered a little with that. Why didn't the Gemara just say the same answer that it just gave a few lines earlier, that it's bifar hesya? So Taisus says it really could have answered that. It just came up with it has another answer as well. And the answer that the Gemara gives now is that imishum teva lav shiurahu, the fact that it left out the ark being brought out only in the final seven fast days, that's not called leaving out a difference. Mishum dekachoshev la beidach pirka, because it includes it. It explains, it expounds on it. It counts it in the other chapter. It counts that as a difference, meaning it makes a big deal out of that procedure, that ceremony. And the Mishnah here is sort of relying on what it says over there, that it basically makes it very clear that they would do the Teva ceremony. They would bring out the ark into the public square. So because it's relying on what it says there, it's not considered that it left it out. Now, the Gemara says, we can rely on the next chapter where it talks about the Teva, Hashta, the Osis, Lahachi. Now that we've come to this understanding that we're not mentioning all the differences, because things that it mentions clearly, explicitly later, we're sort of leaving out. We're not mentioning that as a difference. So guess what? We could say the same thing for the 24 brachas. The 24 blessings are also not considered leaving out diktani la bidach pirka, because we learned them, we're taught them in the other chapter, which means in the second chapter. So it comes out that we do not have any proof that the middle fasts, they would recite the extra 6 brachas that were added in the final fasts. We don't have any proof. It could be they said them. It could be they didn't say them. We don't have a proof. The Mishnah doesn't mention them when it talks about the differences, but it still could be, there could be that these are a difference because it did leave it out. Could be that it's not different because the fact is, it could be that it relied on what it says in the final chapter. And if it's relying on what it says in the final chapter, then there's reason why it left out this difference. And really there is a difference. So it could very well be that there's a difference in only the final 7 that you add the extra brachas. Now let's just figure out, where does this take us back to? So the previous Gemara had mentioned that we had a brisa, we had a whole question. When does an individual add the addition of Anenu. And the previous Gemara had two opinions. And we had the father and the son. You remember that the father took his son and he said, I want you to know that you should recite the Anenu in a bracha of its own. And the son argued and he said, no, an individual does not recite Anenu in a bracha of its own right with Hashem's name at the end saying a blessing. And instead, an individual just adds it as a addition into the Shema Kreilenu bracha, into the generic bracha. He adds a few sentences, but he doesn't make a separate bracha. If you remember that story, so that was the Rav Yehuda and Rav Yitzchok. Rav Yehuda is the father. Rav Yitzchok was the son. And Rav Yitzchok and Rav Sheshas, the son, Rav Yitzchok and also Rav Sheshas, they had both said that an individual adds it in Shemet Tefillah. And then we had a question from this brisa, and that's what brought us to this whole discussion. The brisa said there's no difference between a yachid and a tzibur. There's no difference between an individual and a congregation. The only difference is about 18 brachas and 19 brachas, and we said that we can't be talking about a shliach tzibur because the chazan, the shliach tzibur, the cantor, he does not say 19 brachas. He says 24 brachas. So therefore, we came to the conclusion that when an individual recites, accepts a fast on himself to fast, a communal fast, a tzibur type of fast, when an individual accepts on himself a more stringent fast, he is supposed to say Anenu as a bracha of its own right. That was what we wanted to explain the brisa to mean. However, according to the way we're explaining the rules of the 24 brachas, and we're saying that it could be that those 24 brachas were not recited by the chazan on every fast day, they were only recited on the final 7, then you could learn this brisa here in a more simple way, and that is that the chazan on a regular fast, that's not the final 7 fast days, he says 19 brachas. He says it as a bracha in its own right. And an individual never says the Anenu prayer as a bracha of its own. He always includes it into the Shema Kreilenu blessing, the generic bracha of Hashem should listen to our prayers. So that's basically what we've come to here, is that the brisa, we don't have any proof to prove Rav Yitzchok and Rav Sheshas wrong. Initially, we tried to prove them wrong, and we don't have proof. Now, the Gemara originally gave already one answer, and it said that it could be that the first 3 fasts, the first 3 fasts, you don't add the extra 6 brachas, but the middle 3 and the final 7, you do add the extra 6 brachas. And therefore, it could be that the brisa is talking about the first 3. But then the Gemara gave explained it that way. Then the Gemara said, if you want, you could say that even the middle 3 also don't add the they also don't add the final 6 brachas, and we could say the brisa is talking about the first 3 and the middle 3 fasts. Both of them, the chazan does 19 brachas, not 24 brachas, because he doesn't add those extra 6 only in the final 7, and that's what we basically are concluding over here, that that you definitely can learn that way. So we have these 2 options of learning the brisa, that the brisa could either mean the first 3, the chazan does 19, or the second 3, also the chazan does 19. So now the Gemara says, so what's the final conclusion with the halacha? When does the individual add the Anenu prayer? Does he recite it as a bracha of its own, or does he recite it in the Shema Kreilenu bracha, which is the way we do it? So the Gemara says, my havi Allah. What is the final conclusion? What is the verdict on this matter? Amar Rav Shmuel bar Sasratoi, V'chein Amar Rav Chia bar Ashi, Amar Rav, in the name of Rav. When do you say Anenu bein goyel or roife? That an individual says it as a bracha of in its own right. He says it in a bracha in its own right of between goyel and roife. Rav Ashi Amar Mishmei de Rav Yanai Bered Shmuel, and Rav Ashi says the name Rav Yanai, the son of Rav Shmuel, the Shemei Tefillah. He says it in Shemei Tefillah, the Hilchasa b'Shemei Tefillah, and that's the final halacha that he says it in Shemei Tefillah. Okay, so that concludes this discussion. That the way we do it is based on this Gemara. Is that a yachid, an individual, whenever you add, when you accept upon yourself a fast, or when you fast in the communal amongst the communal fasts, you're fasting yourself, you're saying your own prayer, so you say it in the Shemei Tefillah, you add it in that prayer. Now comes the next Gemara. Tani Chada, we learned in one brisa taught, Ubrais umenikos, pregnant women and nursing women, Mesanois Barishonis, they fast on the first three, the Ein Mesanois Ba'achronis, they don't fast on the final, the end ones. And now it's unclear what's the first and what's the end, because there's also a middle. So we seem to be using terms, the beginning, the end, but we're not clarifying what the beginning means. Is this the beginning to the final ones, or is it the beginning of the first or the first of the last? Whenever we have three brises that seem to contradict each other, and the Gemara is going to say it's not a contradiction, because the first could mean the middle, or the last could mean the middle, because the last of the first ones, or the first of the last ones. So it could always, so it's very vague. So one brisa says, the pregnant women and nursing women, masanis b'rishonis vein masanis b'achronis, they fast on the first fast, they don't fast on the last fast. The Tanya Yiddish, we have another brisa that says masanis b'achronis, they do fast on the last fast. Vein masanis b'rishonis, they don't fast on the first ones. The Tanya Yiddish, we have another brisa that says they don't fast in either. Vein masanis b'rishonis le b'achronis, they don't fast to be the first ones or the last ones. Amar Rav Ashi says, you know what? It's not a contradiction. Take the middle fasts in your hand. Dimetartzin kulhu, and then all of these brisas will be answered. What does that mean? That they fast only on the middle fasts. So now, if we look over these brisas, we're going to translate them differently. Ubrais umenikais. We're going to recite this Gemara one more time. Let's learn it one more time and see the new meaning of it. Ubrais umenikais, the pregnant women and nursing women, masanois berishonis, they fast on the middle fasts, the first of the last. The ein masanis b'achronis, and they don't fast on the final seven. They only fast on the middle ones, which we're calling rishonis. Tanya idach, we have another brisa that says masanis b'achronis, they fast on the final fasts of the first ones, which means the middle fast. They fast on the achronis, which we're calling the end one, the end of the first ones, meaning the middle fast. The ein masanis b'rishonis, they don't fast on the first fasts. The Tanya, we have a third brisa, another brisa that says ein masanis, they don't fast not in the loy b'rishonis, not the first ones, loy b'achronis, and not in the final ones, the final seven, but rather they do fast on the middle three. Now, now we have Rav Ashi's explanation that it's that this is how he explains it, that they do fast on the middle ones. Now the question is, of course, why should they fast on the middle ones if they didn't fast on the first ones? And they what's different about the first ones than the middle versus the last ones? Why these differences? So seemingly the first fasts are not strict. Yes, Jeffrey.
When we say first fast, it seems to me there's also another possibility. The first fast would mean the Mondays.
Okay.
All the Mondays. And the middle ones would be all the Thursdays. So that they would be participating in all of the cycles, but not fully.
Yeah, the problem is it's not going to answer the problem. There's contradictions in these brises.
Right.
That's the problem. In other words, we're trying to answer them all up and say they all agree. According to you, you'd have a three-way argument.
Okay,
You know,
the issue here then would be that the Rishonos means all Monday, Thursday, Monday of the first set.
right? Or it might mean the middle set, which is the way we translated it as the,
Yeah.
to answer the problem, to make all of them agree. We
But the la-
explained it.
but the last ones are much longer. It's 7 days.
Right.
Okay, thank you.
So that, yeah. So Rashi says, Deloitte takif rugza kulei hai. Rashi uses this term that the um, the Rishonos, they don't fast on because Hashem's anger is not so strong, and um, and the final fasts, the final seven, they would not fast on, and the reason for that, because the Ubrais and Menikais, these pregnant women, they wouldn't be able to handle all seven. So the middle ones are more serious, but they're not too long. It's only three that they fast. So that's the understanding over here. So what you see here really is that these are groups of fasts. We don't do partial. If the women can't fast all seven, they don't do it. Yeah, that's what you basically see. That it's a group. It's a group of three fasts. The group of the three makes it powerful. The seven makes it a certain power to it. And if you're not going to do all of it, we don't obligate you in doing a partial. It's not. It's either all or nothing. Basically, it's either all of this group. Each group is a group of its own in its own right, and the group is an all or nothing group. You do the first three, no. You do the final seven, no. The middle three, yes, that they could do, but they could handle one or two more fast maybe, in the final seven, no, they don't have to do any of them because that final seven seems to have a certain uh, um, uh, 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 some type of a number to the number seven, that it's uh, important to do all of them, and if you're not going to do all of them, we don't obligate you to do. It's almost like the rabbi's decree is a one. It's one decree. You have to fast these seven, and that one decree is either someone can do it or they can't. That's what it seems like. It's like the rabbis made a set decree for seven. They're not going to say individual. You have to fast Monday and then fast Thursday. Seven. They made the decree. You have to do seven fasts. People can handle the seven. They're not gonna do it. It's a group. Okay. Now we did mention also that the Rambam actually paskins differently than this. We said that interestingly, the Rambam, and the way the Rambam learns is take the middle brisa, and that's the main one. That's the halacha, is the middle brisa. Misanes ba'achroinos, vein misanes b'rishonos. That's the way he learns, that they would fast in the final seven, and they wouldn't fast the first or the second group of three. So the Rambam has another understanding, which is not surprising. The Rambam often well, first of all, he might have had a slightly different version. It could be one or two words were different or something. But in addition, the way he understood it is that you take the middle brisa, and that's the final halacha. Okay, now we have
Why,
not.
why is it expressed, take it in your hand?
Well, you know, it's just a term. It's just poetic. It's a term that's used. I'm not.
I mean,
I'm
what
not
does it
sure.
mean what does it mean to say?
Well, it
Take it in
means
your
you
hand.
take the middle one is going to answer all the problems. If they
Okay.
fast, take that one is the ones that they fast on.
Well, Rabbi,
Uh,
doesn't nakot mean note? It says note the
Um,
middle ones, and that would answer it. It would mean take it in your hand because if you,
well, it says biyadcha.
yeah, so
Yeah, it's often used as nakat. He took. It's often used as a term of taking in the Gemara. But it could mean it sometimes does mean like a note. Yeah, it could mean note, but it still says the word biyadcha. That's I think David was uh, surprised that he used that word biyadcha. Okay. The Gemara continues, says, so in what way are the final 7 more strict than the others? Because in these they would do the Masriyan, blow the shofar, or say this Anenu prayer, and they would also close the store. So that made these final 7 more strict than the middle 3, and of course more strict than the first 3. But my Masriyan, in what way? What does it mean? With what did they do the Masriyan, the crying out? Rav Yehuda says with a shofar, and here it's a little confusing because it's also Rav Yehuda. But Rav Yehuda berei de Rav Shmuel bar Shelos mishmei de Rav, and another Rav Yehuda, not the same one, obviously, a different Rav Yehuda. This is Rav Yehuda, the son of Rav Shmuel bar Shelos, in the name of Rav. So we'll just call this opinion Rav's opinion. And the first opinion we'll call Rav Yehuda. Rav Yehuda said shofar. Rav's opinion is Amar ba'anenu. You would say a prayer called anenu. This is not the anenu that we've been talking about until now. Now comes a new anenu. This anenu is said in the end of Slichos. It's anenu Hashem anenu anenu Elokeinu anenu anenu Avinu anenu anenu Barinu anenu anenu Shenu anenu Galenu. There's an aleph base there, and then we say Elokei Avram anenu anenu Elokei Yitzchok anenu Yaakov anenu. We have all these anenus, maybe about 50 anenus or whatever, 30 anenus. So it goes through all these anenus. That prayer it seems to be a very powerful prayer, because the Gemara has a whole discussion that prayer was recited specifically on the final 7 fasts. So often we just read through that prayer, but here you really see how important it is that this is the uniqueness of the final 7 fast days for rain, was this Anenu prayer, and to the extent that there's a thought in the Gemara here that the opinion that says Anenu says you don't blow shofar, you only do the Anenu. Now let's go through the Gemara, because it is a little confusing, and Rashi has an interesting way of learning this Gemara. So the Gemara says, in what way did they do Masriyan? So Rav Yehuda says the final 7 fasts were done with a shofar, and Rav says that they were done with this Anenu prayer. Kosalka daitoch, it went up in their mind. In other words, the Gemara, the understanding of the scholars was that man de Amar ba'anenu, the opinion that says Anenu, which is Rav, loy Amar b'shofar, he doesn't hold they blew shofar. He says in the final 7 fast days, they didn't blow shofar. They would only do this special Anenu prayer. Uman Amar b'shofar is the opinion that says that they would do shofar, which is Rav Yehuda, loy Amar ba'anenu, they would blow the shofar. They would not say this Anenu. That's what the Gemara initially thought. And that's the argument, that they would do Masriyan, but what is Masriyan is an argument. According to one, it's shofar, not Anenu. According to the other one, it's Anenu and not shofar. The Gemara says, but we learned in a brisa, we don't do less than 7 on the community, which is the final 7. Shebehen Yudches Asrois, that in them you would have 18 blows. V'simin ladavar, or 18 cries. But the Gemara says, simin ladavar, a symbol for this is Yericho, Jericho. In Jericho, they blew the shofar. But Yericho shofars have it. Yericho, they blew the shofars. So it uses this term as a sign that the 7 fasts that had these extra blessings in them. So they would blow the shofar 18 times, which means a tekiah, teruah, tekiah. You know, the long blast, the middle blast, and the long blast. So they would do this. That would be considered 3. So each of the blessings they would do 3. It would be 6 extra brachas. They would do 18. They would basically blow 18 times. Of course, there's a whole question here. Was it really 21? Because they would also blow at the bracha Goyel Yisrael. So the Gra wants to change the girsa here to say it's not 18. It should say 21. It must have been some mistake. But anyway, our Gemara says Yodches. So they would blow these extra 18, 18 hasrais, and it sounds very clearly that it was done with a shofar, not with Anenu. Masriyan, it says pretty clearly, it's a similar davar, is Yericho, Jericho. In Jericho, they used the shofar. Jericho, they were answered. That's how they were answered with the shofar. So Ella, the Gemara says, rather, b'shofar is the kol yama like pligi, the korei le'asra. Everyone agrees that In our scenario, Masriyan means a shofar, meaning when it comes to a fast that has to do with rain, we use a shofar. Ki pligi, when do they argue? Ba'anenu, when we talk about other fast days that have to do with other tragedies or challenging situations that the Jewish people are in, plagues and other types of uh, uh, other, all types of dangers. So then, when do they? Uh, so then, let me read it again. Ki pligi. When do they argue with what? When do they argue? It's ba'anenu. One second. Let me see. Let me read it again. Yeah, but Ella b'shayfers kol yamalei pligi. In our Mishnah, everyone agrees that Masriyan means b'shayfers. The Karei Asra. That's called Asra. Ki pligi. When do they argue? Ba'anenu. With regard to anenu, other fast days, other types of fast days. Is anenu also called Masriyan? Mar Sabra Karei Asra. Mar Sabra like Karei Asra. One opinion says that it could be called Hasra Anenu, and the other opinion says it's not called Hasra. And therefore, if it's not called Hasra, they would only blow shofar. They would not do the Anenu prayer in the other fast days. So that this is the way Rashi's learning. Now it's a little different than you commonly have these type of words in the Gemara. In other words, there's a certain style, a tapestry that the Gemara normally uses, and the way Rashi learns it here, he sort of like veers off of the usual. Normally, you would translate these words to mean everyone agrees that that Masriyan means a shofar. For sure, they would do a shofar. What do they argue about if it also means anenu? So that would mean that in our Gemara, in our Mishnah, when it says Masriyan, they for sure blew shofar, and they would also do anenu according to one opinion. That's not the way Rashi learns it here. Rashi sort of takes a different style over here and says, no, that's not the meaning. And there's reason why Rashi feels forced to learn it this way. And he says that in our Mishnah, everyone agrees that it's only shofar and not anenu. Goodbye. Done deal. When do they argue? In the other cases of plagues, then there's an argument if it's shofar or anenu. Now let's see it. Actually, you can see it in Rashi. Ki pligi ba'anenu is 7 lines up from the bottom, or 8 lines up from the bottom in Rashi. It says Ki pligi b'masriyan darminan ba'almal shar peraniyos. When do they argue when it talks about masriyan for other plagues, other peraniyos, dangerous, challenging happenings, punishments? Peraniyos would be other punishments. Mar savra anenu nami hasra. One master says that anenu also means is included in the word hasra. By diktani ba'alma masriyan ba'anenu. In this, that it says in general masriyan by these other types of fasts for other punishments. It means anenu. Mandar b'shayfreis, the opinion that says it means shayfreis, avo ba'anenu loy, they would not do anenu. Let's read it back. Let's go back in the Gemara. So the Gemara says, Marsavar Karile Hasra, Marsavar like Karile Hasra, Lamandamar Banenu, the opinion that says Anenu, Kolshkein B'Shayfris. So in other words, regarding these other types of punishments and plagues, so they would the opinion that says Anenu, Kolshkein B'Shayfris, for sure, the word Masriyan means shayfris, and they would do shayfris on other types of on other types of fasting. Just one second. Actually, it's a little unclear what Rashi holds here. A little unclear if Rashi learns that kolshkein b'shayfris would they do the shayfer and the anenu? Let's learn not. Kol shkein b'shofar for sure could mean Masrian could mean shofar as well. According to the opinion that it means anenu, kol shkein b'shofar, for sure Masrian could be done crying out, could be done with a shofar. It's a little hard to see the other opinions. It's much easier to explain the other commentaries. Rashi's explanation is a little vague. Some want to even say that it's missing these words in the Gemara. According to that, Rashi didn't have these words. In any event, we could just learn it that way. That according to the opinion that it's anenu, that Masrian means anenu, for sure it means shofar. Mandamer b'shofar, it's according to the opinion that it means with a shofar, ava b'anenu loy, but anenu it does not mean. So that's that's basically the discussion here. Does Masrian, could it mean anenu, or also, or does it only mean shofar? Is there only one translation of Masrian crying out? Now Rashi gave us also a little hint, and he said that the reason why you would say Masrian doesn't mean shofar is because Mirian would mean shofar from the word trua, Mirian. Masrian actually causes us to want to say that it must mean more like a crying out. Now the Gemara will ask a contradiction on this, and that's right here. Vohatanya, we're 5 lines up or 6 lines up from the bottom of the page. Vohatanya, if you are in the art scroll, let me tell you where we are. Tanya 14:8-2, the last little paragraph there. The last paragraph, last 2 lines. Tanya shar kol mine peronius. But the Gemara asks, but we learned in a brisa that all other peronius punishments, hamisragshos, that are gathering, kagoin chichuch. For example, people have a problem of there's some plague, scratching. People are some type of a dermatology issue of scratching themselves. Chag of locusts. There's a plague of locusts. And we're talking about that it's not so severe. And therefore, we're going to be saying that you don't blow the shofar here. So these are not severe cases. So chichuch is some scratching issue of the community. A chagav, there's a locust issue, but obviously not as severe as the plagues that we know of locusts in the time of Moshe Rabbeinu in Egypt, and in the time of Yoel, we know that the other plague. This is obviously a much less of an issue. Zevuv, Bitsira, V'yitushim, there's flies, wasps, and mosquitoes. So these type of, it's a plague, but it's obviously not life or death. Vishiluach dechashim ve'akrabim, and also there is the sending out by Hashem of snakes and scorpions. But again, there's an issue of them injuring but not killing. So in these cases, loy hoyu masriyan elat soyakin, they wouldn't do the masriyan. And again, we're trying to prove what masriyan means, and it either means shofar or it means crying out to Hashem with anenu. But if it means crying out to Hashem, it doesn't really fit, because it says they wouldn't do it, but they would be tsayakin, they would cry out. They wouldn't do masriyan, but they would cry out. That doesn't seem to fit if you want to translate masriyan as crying out. Therefore, it makes sense to mean masriyan means a shofar and tsayakin means a crying out. Yes, Ezra.
Mosquitoes is malaria, which can kill. So why would that not be considered as deadly as?
So we'd have to look up the exact brisa. And we'll learn more about these later on in the Gemara. There's a Gemara later that brings this. So we'll when we study it more, we'll understand it exactly how they're learning. But seemingly snakes and scorpions would be very serious as well. But we'll have to see it. It's later on. a little later
The
on in this tractate.
the answer to what Ezra is saying is that most mosquito bites do not result in malaria, whereas most snakes and scorpion bites are problematic.
Not
Well,
necessarily. Depends
let's
on
wait.
whether
Let's
it's a
push it off.
black or
Let's
it's a
push it off till later.
brown scorpion.
Yeah, we'll deal with it later when it comes up when it's the main discussion. So the Gemara says here we're only trying to figure out what Masriyan means here. We're not dealing with the details of that brisa, and we will study it. So midatzaka b'peh, since crying out means with one's mouth, hasra b'shayfer. So hasra would mean with a shayfer, and that would sort of prove that even for these other types of crying, other types of plagues, when we talk about Masriyan, we mean Shaifer, not Anenu. So the Gemara answers, you're right, but that's one opinion. There's another opinion. Tanoihi, it's really an argument of the Tanoim, and this Tana actually does understand crying out when it comes to other plagues. They would cry out, it means with a Shaifer, but there's another opinion that says crying out would mean with one's prayer. Tanoi, it's an argument of the Tanoim, the Tani, because we have another a source, and it says the Tanya, but really it's the Tanan. It really should be Ditnan. It's a Mishnah. The Mishnah says Al Elu Masriim Shabbos. On these following things, they would cry out even on Shabbos. Al Ir Shekifu Gaius, on a city that was surrounded by troops, like siege. A nahar, or river that overflowed, Valsfina Shematerevas Bayam, a ship that is shaking and breaking apart in the sea, or the waves are pushing it in the sea. And Rabbi Yosi says, so those you can even do the Masriyan on Shabbos. And Rabbi Yosi says, Le'ezra avalei le'tza'aka. You're allowed to do the Masriyan Le'ezra to get help, but not for tza'aka, not to cry out to Hashem. So we have clearly here, b'mai, what is this referring to? Ilema b'shofres, if you want to say this Masriyan means shofres, shofres b'Shabbos mishari, are you allowed to blow shofar on Shabbos? There's a prohibition of blowing shofar on Shabbos, at least rabbinically. So the Gemara says, elalav ba'anenu. Rather, what we must be talking about is crying out to Hashem with the prayer of Anenu, the Karile Hasra, and it's called Hasra, Shmamina. It's referring to these other types of plagues, and it calls it Hasra. This basically shows us that there is an opinion that Hasra means Anenu also, that it could also mean Anenu. It doesn't only mean Shofar, it could also have meaning of Anenu, and according to this opinion, when it comes to other plagues, they would actually do the Anenu prayer, and that's what Masriyan means. Now, what is this? What is the concept over here of not crying out on Shabbos? So basically, it seems like there are two understandings over here, that asking Hashem for such a miracle on Shabbos, being that it's such a beyond imagination type of miracle, so you should instead try to get help rather than sort of like do a prayer that's likely in vain. And that's one of the understandings. Another understanding is that it's you don't do this in you don't do this in a public way, but Ezra you could do it for help, meaning you could daven in a private way, but not in a public way. It wasn't done. So in other words, that would be sort of losing the sanctity of the Shabbos. Okay, so now we're back to the next. We're finished this Gemara. So it's called Hasra Shmami. No, we hear from this that the word Hasra could mean Anenu. Okay, now, so what do we conclude from Rashi, the way Rashi learned this Gemara? The conclusion of Rashi is that our Mishnah talks about Hasra Masriyan in the final 7 fast days. What it means is they would blow the shofar. That's the conclusion that everyone agrees with. Okay, everyone, at least according to the way Rashi learns it. Bishnei Rabbi Yehuda Nasiya have a tzayir. The days of Rabbi Yehuda Nasiya, there was a tsar, pain, an affliction. Not a drought. It was a some other type of affliction. So we turn the page now, 14b. Gazer plus esrei tainiyos. So he decreed Rabbi Yehuda Nasiya, and we explained that this is seemingly this is not Rabbi Yehuda Hanasi, first of all, but it's also not Rabbi Yehuda Nasiya, the grandson of Rebbe, even though the art scroll, I think, learns that way, but it's probably the grandson of the grandson. And the reason is because the other rabbis lived much later. So the days of this Rabbi Yehuda Nasiya, was Gazar Tlas Esrei Tainiyos. He decreed 13 fasts, and he wasn't answered. So Sabra Lamigzar Tfei, so this Rabbi Yehuda Nasiya wanted to be geyser more, wanted to make more decrees. Amar Lei Rav Ami said to him, Hare Amru ein matrichen asat sibar yosimidai. You're not supposed to burden the community more than they can handle, and don't make more decrees. Amar Rav Abba Bered Rav Chia bar Abba. Rav Abba said the name of Rav Chia bar Abba, that Rav Ami, the Avad, Rav Ami that did this, or that said this, Legarmei who the Avad, he did it for his own interest. He didn't want to fast more, and therefore he said, don't do any more fasts. You don't want to burden the community, but really he did it for himself. A little surprising that we're judging Rav Ami in this way, that he would have done this for personal interests. Ella, rather, Hachi Amar Rav Chia bar Abba Amar Rav Yochanan. This is what Rav Chia bar Abba said, the name of Rav Yochanan. Leishanu Ella legeshamin. This amount of fasts that you can't exceed, you can't do more than 13, is only applicable to rains. But for other types of punishments, we fast and continue to fast until they're answered from heaven. So Ami seemed to want to limit the fasts to 13. And because that's what it seems like from the Mishnah. Again, our Mishnah does seem to follow this logic that you don't do more than 13. You do 3, 3, and 7. Altogether, that's 13. And you don't do more than that. It says other people, maybe Yehidim can fast. It said, our Mishnah said that maybe scholars would fast, or they would do other types of inuyim, of painting themselves. We had a few cases in the Mishnah, but in truth, the way Reb Chia bar Abba holds, and it says in the name of Rabbi Yochanan, that these laws don't apply when it comes to other types of sufferings and punishments. When they said 3, and when they said 7, that only applied to rain fast, but it didn't rain. They would continue fasting until they're answered. Let's say that this proves Rav Ami wrong, who wanted to say that this applied to any type of issue of punishment. He wanted to apply the same law to all cases. So Rav Ami can answer you Tanoihi. It's really an argument of the Tanoim, where the Tanya, because we have a brayse saying goes in Yosim Mishalosh Tanis al Tzibor, Pishin Matrichin Asat Tzibor, Yosim Idai, Divrei Rebbe. The words of Rebbe are that you don't do more than 13 because we don't want to burden the community too much. Reb Shimon ben Gamliel was that. Reb Shimon ben Gamliel says that's not the reason. The reason we don't do any more than 13 is not because of burdening, it's because of the time for the rain has passed, and it's not going to be beneficial if it rains now. So therefore, there's no reason to get the community to fast more, if it's too late. So according to this, this ruling would only apply to rain fasts, but other fasts that you need to get rid of the plague, you should continue fasting. According to the first opinion, you don't want to overburden the community. That would apply to all types of cases. Seemingly, if that's the reason you don't want to overburden the community, if that's the reason not to do more than 13 for rain, that rule should apply also to other types of fasts as well. So that's this is the source of Rabami, that he says it's because you don't want to overburden the community, and that's the reason. If that's the reason, it applies to not just to rain fast, but it applies to other types of fasts as well. The people of Nineveh sent a question, a shayla, to Rebbe, to Goyin Anan, people like us, to Kuvas Tammuz, even in the summer, the Tammuz Tekufa, the Tammuz era season, they would even in that time, Be'inon Mitra, we need rain. We need rain even in the summer, not like in Israel where they only want rain in the winter. It's only good for them in the winter. But in places like Nineveh, where even Tekufas Tammuz, they need rain. Heichi Navid, how should we ask for rain? Ki yachidim daminan, are we similar to individuals that we ask for rain? Karabim daminan, or are we similar to a community, a public that needs rain? So what do we consider ourselves? And basically, the question is, when do we, where do we, how do we include the prayer for rain, the same Talmud? So it explains, Ki yechidim daminan of a Shemei Tefillah. We like yechidim individuals, and we ask for rain in the bracha of Shemei Tefillah, which would be the generic bracha. That's where we ask for rain. But in the regular place where we ask for rain, we don't ask for rain because the general public doesn't want rain in this at this time. Only in our country we want rain in the summer. Oy karabim daminan, because we're an entire a nation, entire city. So therefore, Berchas Hashanim, we should recite it. We're not just an individual that I need for rain for my farm. We're talking about a whole big city. It was a huge city, and we should say it in Berchas Hashanim. So Rebbe answered them, Ki yechidim demisu, you are similar to individuals. Uveshemet tefillah, you should recite the prayer for rain in the Shemei Tefillah bracha. Okay, we're going to conclude. We're going to stop here. And tomorrow, Mitzvah Hashem, we'll finish the Chazara, and we'll move on to the second parak, Mitzvah Hashem. Zai Guzman, have a wonderful day.
Thank you, Rabbi.